Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming. Let me share my screen so we can get this webinar started. Can you hear me okay? Now you can confirm or deny.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Perfect, okay, cool. So this is going to be quite an exciting and challenging webinar. So we are going to go through some really advanced examples of prototyping, which goes beyond what you can see on the market today. I'm going to share some really cool patterns that I hope you are going to like. The challenge is that they're difficult. So the challenge is on me. I need to explain how to make all this magic happen. So as Natalie mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder at UXPin. But more importantly, I'm actually a coding designer myself. This is my passion of my life. So you can ask all sorts of questions about design and coding as well. Couple of words about UXPin. I suppose majority of you know what UXPin is, so let me just emphasize what is really important to us at UXPin. So we are a code-based design platform, and I'm going to explain what does it mean that we are code-based in a couple of minutes. Now, we are really good for collaborative prototyping. UXPin comes with real-time collaboration and comments and all sorts of advanced collaboration features that you might expect from an enterprise-ready tool. Of course, everything that you create in UXPin can be saved in a design system, and documentation is mostly generated directly from the code that you actually visually create in UXPin. Now, we started a long time ago, back in 2010, and while our first product was very different than what we offer today, we continue to be on the very same mission, the mission to merge design and development. Once we actually decided that we want to create a design tool that's going to connect these two worlds, we knew that we have to create a drastically different tool than what was back then available on the market, and frankly, drastically different than vast majority of the tools available to designers and engineers today. We knew that we have to create a tool in a completely different paradigm, code-based design tool. Now, what does it mean? When you're drawing something in UXPin, it looks pretty much the same as in Sketch or Figma or any other tool out there. Drawing a box, you have an experience of drawing a box, really what you expect. Now, the difference and the most important thing is actually happening beyond what you can see. When you're drawing something in UXPin, you're actually creating HTML, CSS. When you are adding interactions, we are actually building JavaScript for you. You never see that because you are creating in a visual way, but this is what is happening on the back end. Now, this is very important for the overall design and engineering process, because when you are creating in a code-based design tool, you are staying within the constraints of development. So whatever you create in UXPin is actually doable during the actual development phase of the project. And most importantly, it looks exactly like how it's going to look like after development, because we are using the browser rendering engine to show you all sorts of objects on the screen that you design. But there are not only limitations in this paradigm. Most importantly, there's the whole power of JavaScript available to you from within a design tool. Sometimes we are half joking that what we are doing at UXPin, we're really creating an interface for web technologies, an interface for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we're making those web technologies available to designers who do not code. Now, all of that combined has a massive impact on the ability of designers to connect to engineers and the other way around. But today, we are going to zoom into prototyping. And prototyping, it's hard to imagine a design process without prototyping. It's such an essential part of exploring new ideas. But in the past couple of years, prototyping started to be really reduced to something that doesn't really serve the original purpose. So when we are thinking about prototyping, we're doing three things really. We're exploring completely new avenues on the path to solve user problem. We are definitely preparing our designs for tests with users, and we want to show the interface in action to developers and other people involved in a project. Now, what you are seeing on the market today is that quite often people just rely on static images connected together in a form of a really visual presentation of a design. Now, this is good for some simple use cases, but for majority of situations, it actually limits the ability to explore new interactive patterns. It's not great for testing because you don't really present the realistic experience. It's definitely not good enough for specification because it's missing a lot of states. So what I'm going to show you today is going way beyond those limitations, and it's really bringing prototyping back to those three root causes to actually prototype in any digital product design. And if we think about those two paradigms that I mentioned, image-based design tools and code-based design tools, in the context of prototyping, you can really see the big differences here. So code-based design tools are ideal for prototyping because you have access to real HTML elements. And we are going to deal a lot today with form elements. You have access to conditional interactions, which are basically an interface for JavaScript. You have access to variables to pass information across elements in a prototype, across pages in a prototype. And you have access to certain JavaScript methods to build super advanced prototypes in no time without any coding knowledge required. So code-based design tools make prototyping feel real. So you can really test those concepts with users. All right, so that's it for slides. Today we are going to talk about variables. I'm going to talk about conditional interactions, and I'm going to show you quite a lot of different JavaScript methods that are available from within UXPin interface. And probably the most difficult thing that we are going to actually address today are regular expressions, which you can also use in UXPin. We're going to explain what regular expressions are and why they're important to designers as well. Okay, so let me turn off the keynote and switch to UXPin. So by the way, this is a normal version of UXPin. So if you sign up for a trial today, you can download our desktop client and you can just start using this very version that I'm using today for the demo during your trial. So there's nothing special here. All of that is available to all of our users. Let me just move this Zoom interface aside that you don't see, but it's in front of my face. And we'll start with the very first demo, which is going to be quite simple. So in UXPin, like this is our design editor, but there's always this preview available to designers. The preview can be shared actually with all the people across your organization or your clients and their stakeholders, so they can experience the design, they can leave some comments, developers can observe spec, you can add some extra documentation on the side. All of that is available from the preview link. We're going to keep it open because it's always automatically updated to reflect changes in the editor. So what do we have now? Like we're going to start with this easy pattern. We have a real input over here, so I can enter any information here, right? Like my name. And we have a button with two states. We're going to inspect that in a second. But when we click on it, nothing happens. Now what we want to build now is basically the second state of this pattern, which is going to pass my name or the name of the user to the second state of this interface, and is going to welcome us. So something really basic. Now, let me show you what's inside here before we'll jump forwards to adding interactions. So in UXPin, as you may know, every element can have states. So you're really recreating the functionality of components available to developers, right? So this button has a state of a hover, right? We just created a state of a hover. And there's an interaction, as you can see, available here. So if we go to the interactions part of the interface, you can see that on hover, we're changing the state of button to hover, right? That's the name of the state. So we are going to spend a lot of time inside of the interactions panel today. To make things easier for all of us, I'm going to open the layers panel so you can see what layers do I have here. Okay, so we have this very simple pattern available here. Now we want to add the new state, right? We want to have the welcome state. So we are going to go ahead and add stage to this entire element. It is very simple. Just click on that, and I'm adding the, say, welcome. I'm just going to name it welcome. So right now, those two states are identical, right? But in the second state, there's a bunch of things that we don't really need. We don't need the input. We don't need the button. We don't need the label. So we can just go ahead and hide all these layers. Now, just for the sake of it, I'm going to go ahead and take this image and expand it. And then we're going to move that to the middle. And you know what? Maybe actually what we are going to do, I'm going to take this label, and we are going to say welcome. Well, that's not the great contrast, but let me move it over here. Okay, that's more visible. Cool. Okay. So now you can see that we have two states. And in fact, they're different, right? They're different. So now, another step, here's what we are going to do. Click on the button, we are going to switch state to this welcome phase, to the welcome state. Okay, so new interaction, click. You can kind of read the interactions in UXPin like a sentence. So click, set state, and it's going to be state of this entire element. It's actually called name box. And the state is going to be welcome. Now, there's a play button over here to kind of like preview the interaction that we planned. So we can see that we have this kind of cool animation plan. You can actually change the easing into something else if you want to. Okay, and now if we'll go to preview, you can see this interaction in action, right? So on click, we change the state of this component into the welcome state, and now on click we are landing here. But the next step, what we are going to do, we're going to pass the information from the input in the first state to fill in this text element with the name of the user. Sounds pretty crazy, huh? Because it's kind of outside of what you would expect from a design tool. It's definitely possible in UXPin because we are code-based. So you have access to certain JavaScript properties. So the first thing that we are going to do, and now I'm going to introduce a new concept, we're going to set up a variable. So what is variable? Variable, you can really think about it as a vehicle for any information. So you can save information to a variable, and you can pass it anywhere within a prototype. It can be on another page, it definitely can be on another state of an element. So what we want to do is basically when user enters information here, we want to save it as a variable. So on click over here, we can pass this information to this text element, right? So variables, you can always see all the variables within a prototype available from this menu. So we are just going to go over here, and we are going to call our variables. It can be whatever it is, but we are just going to call it name box name. Not perfect name, but let's say that's going to work. Okay, so now we have variable, it's empty. So what we want to do is set up an interaction that's going to fill this variable with the content of the input. Okay, so now again, we are setting up an interaction, so we're back into the interaction panel. And what we are going to do now is basically on change. So whenever content of this input changes, we are going to set variable, and we have to select our variable name box name. And now we want to fill this variable with the content of input. So with whatever the user enters here, okay? So now when user is going to enter any information here, it's going to automatically land in the variable name box name. Okay, and now on click, so we are going back to the button over here. Not only we want to change the state of this call element, but also we want to change the content of this text element to the content of the variable, okay? So we are going to add another on-click interaction, and we are going to say that on click, we want to go ahead and set content of this element over here because it's being passed to the second state. I want to fill it with the name box name variable. Okay. So really just a couple of interactions. Now let's see what happens over here. So we'll enter my name. And we have welcome Marcin box. So we just passed, I hope you followed. So we passed the information from the input directly to the text element, and we change the state. It feels magical, but as you can see, it is pretty easy. We'll just go ahead, refresh this page so we can see it again, and it's not hard-coded, and that's the thing with variables. Those are not hard-coded information. So let's say that now we are welcoming Joe, okay? Now it says welcome Joe. So it's fairly easy concept, but as you can imagine, this is actually useful in a lot of use cases that we as designers, as engineers, we cover every single day, right? If you want to simulate a flow of a sign up and you want to pass the email that user enters into the sign up form that you prototype into settings or into an account page that you want to test as well, you'll just use variable to pass this information. Okay, so this is how variables basically work. You just pass information with variables across the prototype. Now, I hope you like it, and we are going to take it to the next level. So here's what we are going to do. We're going to revisit our interaction. And on click, we're going to do something, or actually, we're going to go ahead and we're going to change this variable content a little bit. So instead of a content of the element over here, we are going to use something called expression. Because what we want to do, we want to add, let's say that we want to add exclamation mark at the end of whatever user enters, okay? That might be a little bit weird, but I want to kind of like introduce you to expressions. So expressions are basically an interface for certain JavaScript methods which are available in UXPin. And we're going to go through a lot of them today, so we don't have to focus on that. But just so you know, those functions available over here are just basically straight out JavaScript that is available in the browser inside of UXPin. So what we are going to do, we are going to use a function called concat, which basically takes any text and lets you add some text at the end of it or wherever you want, really. So we are going to take the content of the input name, okay, and we are going to concat it with an exclamation mark. So to kind of mark text inside of a function in UXPin, similarly to JavaScript, you have to use quotes. The only distinction here is that we actually saved the single quotes for names of elements available in UXPin. And for any other text, it's double quotes, right? So that's something that you want to keep in mind. Okay, so we change this interaction. And now you have exclamation mark at the end. so this is you can have a lot of fun with interactions. I can show you again that this is not a hard-coded thing. So let's say that instead of exclamation mark, we'll just go with a smiley face, okay? All right, cool. So we'll enter the name again, and now we have a smiley face. So this is the power of variables connected to expressions. And that's perhaps concat is perhaps the simplest thing that you can do with expressions. So we can basically modify the text entered by a user and add different things here. Which means, for example, that you can, as you can imagine, you can add an input from first name to the last name, and you can create the full name automatically with UXPin based on the content entered by users. But the possibilities are basically endless. Okay, so that's the first example that I wanted to show you. So you could see actually in action a couple of things that we recently, back in October, introduced to UXPin. So just to recap this part, every element can have states. States can be completely modified, and they're automatically animated. So as you could see over here, like there's an animation on hover, right? Just automatically added. And there's an animation of this picture automatically added between states. So you get those advanced animations automatically. So that was the first thing that I explained. The second thing was the ability of to save information to a variable, right? So we are taking the content of the input, we're saving it as a variable inside of the prototype, and then we are passing content of this variable to the second state. We could pass the same content to another page of a prototype, to another place in a prototype. You can basically do it do with it whatever you want. The interaction that we use to set this content from a variable to this text element is called set content, right? And then finally, the last thing that we introduced in this first example was an ability to use JavaScript expressions inside of UXPin. So we used a simple function called concat, and we added first an exclamation mark, then a smiley face, to the content entered by user into the input, and we pass that all together to the second state. Okay, so we just touched, the basic powers of JavaScript within UXPin, and hopefully you can see already how this code-based design approach is just taking design practice to a completely new level. In a very modern environment, all of a sudden you have a visual access to the powers of web technologies. Okay, so hope you're ready for a bunch of other examples. Now we are going to move to some super advanced stuff. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through a couple of cool things. So first of all, we are going to have an ability to pass a phone number from this input over here to this text element over here. We're going to do a couple of cool things with that. Then we are going to build a password validation form in a prototyping tool. Isn't that interesting? So we are going to basically mark those checkboxes when there's going to be more than 9 characters, where there's going to one lowercase letter, one uppercase letter, one number, one special character. So we are going to build the real thing. So you can imagine that's something that you could test with users, and you don't have to actually build the entire thing. So you can just test concepts quickly. Then I'm going to show you how to build a very simple calculator. Fun fact is to actually build a real calculator inside of UXPin, and I'm pretty sure you can build one of those crazy science calculators as well. But just for the sake of today's webinar, we are going to build this very basic calculator that's just going to take two digits, two numbers from those two inputs. You can select operator, and we are going to drop results over here. And then I'm going to show you the last thing that I'm going to build from the scratch, and I'm going to show you some other examples as well. But the last thing that I'm going to build from scratch is basically the context awareness inside of a prototype. So we are going to use some magic, and we are going to make this page in a prototype aware. On click into this box, it's going to show us the operating system that I'm using. And on click on this box, it's going to show us the width of the screen. So we are going to really be into some magical stuff. But we'll start with the phone number. So we already know a couple of things about those advanced interactions in UXPin. By the way, you can notice how fast UXPin works these days when you're switching between pages. There's basically no load. It's another magical trick for another day, perhaps. So now you can kind of expect that what we are going to do is that basically on change onto this input, we're going to pass this content to this element over here. Okay, so that's going to be the first thing that we are going to do. So we're going to just start with the interaction panel over here again. The trigger is going to be on change. So it's important to understand that on change is basically an event that is triggered by the change of a state of an HTML form element, right? So it can be a text field, it can be a radio button, it can be a checkbox, select list. All of those elements, they actually trigger this change event that we are hooking up here with our interactions, okay? So on change, we want to set content of this phone number. And this time, let's say that we want to set it. We are not going to save it to a variable. We don't really need that just for an easy passing content in that particular use case. But what we are going to do, we are going to use the expression panel, and this element is called input phone. So we have it here. Perfect. So we are going just to pass this content over here, input phone, to this text element. Okay. So just a very simple interaction. Now let's see what is going on here. Okay, cool. So we're entering stuff into the input field, and it's landing right there inside of this element. But it's not properly formatted, as you can see. It's just whatever we enter. So if I go ahead and enter something like that, it's still landing there. Okay, so we have to deal with that. And there's a couple of things that we have to add to our very simple interaction. So the first thing that we want to add is actually, we'll start with something really advanced, okay? But I believe in you. I know you can get it. So we'll start with a special function that's called format. And format is a pretty magical thing. Because what it does is basically allows you to format any text passed from an input before you actually drop it into another element. And it's kind of like an innovative approach in UXPin. And this is how you can enter this information. So anything but an escaped question mark is going to be directly passed into this element. Question marks, on the other hand, are representing every character passed from the input. So if we do something like that, the first two characters passed or typed into the input are going to land between parentheses, right? Now, let's say that we want to have space after that, another 3 numbers, and another 4 numbers. We'll go with the US based phone number format, okay? So now what we expect is that whatever user inputs over here in the input lands within the parentheses, 3 first digits, 3 first characters. We don't really limit what user enters yet. And then another 3 space and another 4, okay? So this is set content and an expression called format. All right. So you can see that already we got parentheses kind of for free. And there's a space, although there's not a space here. And there's our 4 after another space. And whatever we entered after that doesn't count anymore, right? We are just taking all the first characters within the format that we defined with the expression. So that is pretty cool. Now, another thing that we want to do, so there's a little bit of an error. Let me just refresh this page so we can see it. And some of you may probably think like, well, that feels like programming. And in fact, you are programming, but you're just programming in a visual and very friendly environment. So you didn't have to set up the whole modern JavaScript framework to use JavaScript, because this is all meant to actually accelerate prototyping process. So similarly to development, we have a little bit of a bug here. We have an underserved use case. So if I enter some letters, it lands into our phone number format. So that's silly, right? We don't want that to happen. So with that, we are going to introduce a completely new concept in UXPin, also introduced in October, by the way. That was a very busy month at UXPin, called conditions, right? So basically, conditions are limiting the whole interaction, right? So what we want to do is we want to trigger this expression, which is formatting the input or the text entered into this input. We want to only save it into this element, right? So we want to only set content of this element if whatever user entered is a number, okay? So how do you do that? So there's a couple of ways actually, but perhaps my favorite way is to actually do if content of the element, so content of this input phone, now matches regular expression. And with regular expressions, there's a couple of things we can do here, but we can just quickly type something that's basically matching all the digits, right? So basically, if something that user entered is not a digit, it's not going to trigger the interaction. Maybe the simple version for that is, well, that's probably going to be the simplest thing actually. Thinking of it, that's probably going to be the one to go with. And now, what are regular expressions? Regular expressions are basically a certain formulas that are matching any text element. And regular expressions are used in vast majority of programming languages out there. They're not the favorite tool of majority of developers I know. Regular expressions are a little bit cryptic, but they're very, very powerful. So you can just use them basically here for all those use cases. So we can use them in UXPin. So now, if it's a digit, it's going to trigger the interaction, right? Let's see if I got this correctly. I'm entering something that's definitely not a number, doesn't work. Well, broke it. Okay, there we go. Numbers work. Letters don't work. Perfect. Okay, so we have that. That works well. Now there's another problem over here that when the input is empty, it's not coming back to the first state. Our first state was 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, right? So what if we want to do something like that? So in fact, we have to set up another conditional interaction, and that one is going to be very similar to what we have here. Just perhaps easier. So on change, okay, we want to set contents. So the same thing, on change. So whatever user enters here, on change, want to set up this text element. And this time we just want to go with value. So we'll just enter text, like this is what we want to see. Okay. So now what we have is whatever user enters something here, it's going to just go ahead and fill it with zeros. So that's not exactly what we wanted. What we wanted is that whenever the is value of the content of this element is empty, right? Whenever it's empty, we want to fill it with zeros. On change, yeah, input found is empty, set it to value, and all these zeros. Okay. So now what we should see over here is that we are entering our number. That works. And then we are deleting it, and it's going back to zeros. Perfect. So we have the full pattern that we wanted to have, right? So we can enter formatted number, we can delete it, and it's disappearing, but we're not getting this awkward empty box, we're getting zeros, right? So with this example, there was a couple of cool things. There were pretty advanced expressions, as you may remember. We actually use an expression called format, which allows you for formatting any text in any way you want, right? So you could add a space after every character, whatever you really want. Then we limited this input to numbers. So letters actually don't work. Okay. Numbers work. And then lastly, we added a conditional interaction, which is reversing everything that user enters here and adds those zeros right there at the beginning of just like the first state of the elements, right? And as you may expect, there's plenty of ways to actually solve this kind of problem within UXPin. You could have two states of this element, and one would have zero, and you could just switch states. You could use different expression to format number, because you can use JavaScript replace function. You can do a lot of things because, I mean, like, this environment is so flexible. So I'm really showing you just one approach to solve those problems among many others that I'm sure you're going to discover on your own in UXPin. Okay, so we'll go ahead and work on this function, on this pattern right now. So this is hopefully very familiar to all of you, because this is basically how password validation should look like, right? Whenever we're entering password, I'm sure you're familiar with those situations. We want to know that what the developer who built the product expected us to enter was more than 9 characters, lowercase character, uppercase character. We want to know it before we actually enter it, right? Because otherwise, I mean, like, we are just learning about it on submit of the entire form, and how frustrating that is, right? And I suspect that the reason the web and digital experience are just polluted with those patterns when we are learning about the state of validation of a password input on submit after we entered all the information, because people are using those image-based tools that don't allow for prototyping these advanced interactions. But that's not our problem, because today we are actually using a tool that can program those little interactions over here. So what we are going to do right now is, on entering certain text over here, we are going to check those checkboxes, okay? So we're going to start with 9 characters. And that one is going to use expressions. I mean, like, all of them are going to use expressions, in fact. That one is going to be a little bit special. So similar to what we had before, there's some old interaction I didn't delete it. But now, on change of this input, if the length of this input is more than 9 characters, we are going to go ahead and change state of this element. I prepared little checkbox over here. So this element already has state, okay? So let's get to it. Okay, on change, set state. Okay, confirmed. Let's see how it looks like. Perfect, works, right? And now we want to have condition, right? It has to be longer than 9 characters. So again, a couple of things we can do over here. I'm just going to use a method that perhaps is I'm going to use the method that's probably the simplest one, at least for me, which is an expression. And inside of UXPin expression, there's a function that checks the length of anything entered into an input, right? And returns the number. So the expression is called length, so nothing really special here. Now we have to find our input. It's called input passwords. You can see that we have this. First of all, there's a smart way to kind of like get the right input. You get the help from UXPin, and then if you are like within the interaction, you're wondering like, how do I get the name of this input? I don't remember how I named this thing. You can see it here when it's selected, and you can see it here in layers panel. Okay. So we are going to select input passwords. Okay, cool. And now we want to go with a number that is greater value 9. Very cool. So now, again, you can kind of read it on change. If the length of the text entered here is greater than 9, then we are going to check this input and make it switch to state confirmed. Okay. So let's see if it works. We'll just enter a lot of characters, and we are more than 9. So we check the checkbox. Very cool. Didn't take much time at all. But now the problem is that if we don't have 9 characters anymore, it didn't uncheck, right? So we need to just add this interaction as well. And the method that I typically use is I basically copy interaction first. So I duplicate it over here. Then I switch this to else. So we have if else statement. And then I'm changing that. So if it's less or equal 9, okay, set state of this element to base. Okay, so just 2 interactions over here. And now we'll enter again. More than 9, less than 9, more than 9, less than 9. Cool, okay, so we have it. By the way, just in case you are wondering, well, what about covering the passwords? You have this pattern available. As I mentioned right at the beginning, this is a real HTML element. So if we'll switch this flag over here to password, now it's covered, okay? And I'm going to show you later on an example when I build in the interaction that also uncovers the password. It's a simple switch of a state of the input, so nothing really complex. All right. So we have this first validation message, very cool. Now we are going to go with a more advanced example, 1 lowercase letter. Okay, so how to do that? So we'll go ahead and again and do on change, okay, set state, this checkbox over here, state confirmed, perfect. And now the condition is going to be a little bit different. Well, we are going to go ahead and do content of the element. We could do it with expressions, but I always think like whenever I can, I'm using just the content of element for the clarity sake. I think that's just more readable. But now we are going to get back to something that you're already familiar with, which is matches regex, right? So matches regular expression. And over here, you can see that there's a bunch of available templates for like the most popular cases in UXPin. But we are just going to write our own. So we can see that regular expressions are not always, hairy and scary. Sometimes they are very, very easy. So for lowercase letters, that's the simplest way to actually write it down. So basically it says in the range of A to Z lowercase, this is the regular expressions. If it matches this regular expression, so whatever user entered has this lowercase letter A to Z, go ahead and set it to confirm, okay? So that's pretty much it. Now we'll just reverse this interaction. So doesn't match regular expressions, state base, cool. And now we have this use case served. By the way, whenever you hover over an interaction in the panel, you can see the element affected. So that's very, very cool. It's very useful for debugging. Like sometimes when we are working on really complex prototypes at UXPin, it's really to miss track of something and see like, oh, I just set up this interaction on an incorrect element. This is the way to go. You can always inspect and see if the interaction is attached to the correct element. Okay, so let's see what we have. We'll start with 9 numbers. Oh, interesting. I think we messed up something, or I messed up something. We have lowercase letters, but we don't have the 9 characters. What did I do over here? Let's see, we'll debug this interaction. Length of the input password value 9. Confirmed. Confirmed. Interesting. Okay. Well, that should work. I'm not exactly sure what did I do over there. Oh, okay. No, wait. I just didn't enter enough numbers. Okay, perfect. Or something is maybe I messed up something. We'll just go ahead. I mean, like, there's probably something in this regular expression that I messed up. But you can see that it's working for the lowercase letter. Okay. So uppercase letters don't do anything. Lowercase letters work perfectly. Very cool. Okay. Now we want to do the same, but for uppercase letters. So that's going to be very simple. I will take a shortcut. I will take the risk and take a shortcut. And I just duplicated this interaction very quickly. And then I'm going to go with a different range. So capital A to capital Z. So the whole alphabet, but all the uppercase letters. Okay. So if it matches this regular expressions, just let's not forget about this little thing over here. We have to change the checkbox to state confirmed. Cool. Okay, and now the reverse. You know, so you're already very familiar with that. That pattern doesn't match state base. Okay, so now we enter the uppercase letter, works. Lowercase letter works as well. Upper, lower, perfect. 9 characters. Okay, very cool. Everything works over here as planned. And now two of a little bit more difficult patterns, but one we are already familiar with the regular expressions, \d. And the other one is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be \W to match all the special characters. So last 2 interactions over here, and then we are done with this password validation. Okay, so hold on. We'll go ahead and we'll go with new interaction, on change, set state of this element over here, and we'll go with state confirmed. And now our condition is going to be matches regular expressions. So again, custom, we'll go with \d for digits, for numbers. And we are going to just quickly reverse it. Very cool. Okay. And now if it doesn't match it, we want to go to state base. All right, let's see if I did it correctly. Yep, number, lowercase letter, and characters. Okay, perfect. We have everything over here. And last interaction, which is our special character. So, wow, you're going to be so trained in setting states of elements, right? Typically, I actually use a little bit of shortcuts. I'm copying more interactions, but I want to be just more careful during the webinar because it's easy to get distracted and do just a user error and not set up it on the correct element, and then it's going to be all messed up. So I'm just more careful than usual. Okay, so on change set state of this last checkbox. But now the condition is going to be the content of the element has to match the regular expression \W for special characters. Cool. And duplicate this element. And now we have to just switch it to doesn't match regular expression and switch it back to base. Okay. So we have a bunch of interactions. Well, 2 interactions for every checkbox. Okay. But what we also have is a fully validated password component, okay? And now the cool thing is, which I'm going to show you in a second, is that you can save this component as a symbol with all the interactions, and then you just set it up once, which anyway took us maybe 5-7 minutes. But you can just save it once, and then your entire organization can reuse this pattern forever. It's always going to work with all these interactions, right? Okay, so now for context awareness. Now this is an interesting thing. So as you know, the browser is very aware of what's going on on your computer. The browser knows what kind of operating system are you using. The browser knows what's the width of the screen. Now, can the prototype know that? And the answer is yes. So we'll just create something very simple. On click onto this box, we are going to go with an expression that's called device OS, okay? And that's it. Doesn't need any parameters, nothing. So you can imagine that on, for example, you're building a prototype and you wanna show something different element of the content when user opens up the prototype on Windows, and you wanna show it differently when user opens it on iOS, on macOS, but it could be iOS as well. So you can see with this little pattern over here that all of a sudden UXPin knows that I'm using macOS. So that's pretty neat, right? So I could set up a condition on this expression and show certain things only for macOS users, okay? So that went smoothly. Now, there's another thing over here. And with that, I'm going to actually take this prototype to the browser so I can show you that an interesting pattern. So UXPin can also be aware of the width of the entire browser. That's called window width. You can also see that there's scroll position, window height. So there's a lot of contextual things that you can set up over here. Okay, I'm going to add this interaction. And now this is the width of the window, but I'm going to do something cool and copy this link of the preview and pass it to my Chrome. And this is, by the way, how sharing in UXPin looks like. So you can just pass copy paste the link and just pass it to whoever needs to see it. And now we know that this entire screen is 1600 pixels, right? And I'm going to go ahead and make it not as wide. And we are getting the result in real time, right? So on click, we're getting the real value, which means that you can build conditions that are you can build conditions into your components so they react to the width of the screen automatically. So that's kind of magical, you know, like you can really build advanced responsive components with a condition based on this screen width with JavaScript expressions. And again, this is all because UXPin has access to the power of JavaScript, so we can really simulate things very well that you can typically just do during development, right? So designers have access to all these powers now. Okay, and now to end this webinar with some super advanced stuff, I'm going to show you some of the patterns that are already saved in the design system first, and then I'm going to show you a very advanced form that is using everything that we discussed today. Okay, so it's kind of like a recap. So we'll start over here. So you can see that I have 3 components that are saved in the design system library. Okay, so this is shared across the organization. So anybody can access those. Anybody with permissions can access those components and use them. Some people can update them, some people don't. Anybody can override the information, so like change content. Now we'll start with a very simple pattern over here. That was my preview, so I will just reopen it. And this simple pattern is your traditional select. So you have 2 states over here. Open, close. So nothing really fancy, right? As you can imagine, there's an interaction added over here that is basically saying next state, right? So next state in that case is the open state of the select. And if we actually try it on preview, you can see that it behaves like your normal select. So that's what you would expect to see. Now, the cool thing is that, as you can see, is that it's actually passing the right information into select, right? So again, something that in development, you know, that's the pattern that we need. But in design, that's something that is very hard to create. Now, some people could say like, well, I can recreate that. That's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 times 2. That's like 12 artboards linked together, something like that, to recreate this pattern. But the trick in UXPin is that with many things that we actually learned today, those are dynamic, right? So if we inspect this pattern, just go ahead and open it. On click, I'm setting the variable selected. We can actually open it and see that we have a variable called selected, and we are basically passing the content of this element to this variable, okay? And then we are setting content of this whole selector with the content of the variable. So it's not that different than what we discussed before. So a very simple pattern. But now, why this is important? Okay. So I'll just go ahead and select those items. And now we have a cool feature called Fill with Data. And there's a couple of options. You can use our generators, which I highly recommend, especially the Unsplash integration, so you can get cool pictures automatically from within UXPin. You can pass JSON data, you can pass CSV, you can pass Google Sheet link, you can take JSON from your own hard drive to fill it with data. But for the simplicity's sake, I'm just going to change this name. As you can see, we are using name just the first name so we can see the difference. Okay, so we have a different data set over here. Okay, and now this pattern continues to work. So this is what makes UXPin so special for design systems, because you can build those super interactive patterns, save them as a component in your design systems, share with the organization, and people can override this data so they can use it on their project, but nobody needs to set up the interactions twice because it just works, right? It just works. So this is really cool. Now, another pattern, which I promised you to show you early on. Oh, for some reason, I'm so down on the screen. Okay, so that's the password component I built some time ago. And it's very similar to what we had over there. The same kind of like the same structure of interactions. So a length of the input higher than 7, uppercase, lowercase, just in one condition. You can do that as well. Of course, number, special characters. So everything that we've learned. But now what I'm doing here, I'm basically changing the state of this input. And as you can see, you can also build this pattern of showing and hiding passwords. So this is really cool. Now, what is happening here, as you can imagine, this element has 2 states, base and uncovered. Okay. And on uncovered, this checkbox is just unchecked. On state base, it's checked. So nothing really that fancy, but look how realistic this prototype is and how cool this component is that you can reuse across your designs. And now, the best and the most advanced pattern that I wanted to show you today, the credit card form pattern. So there's a bunch of things going on, and there's nothing outside of what we've learned in today's webinar happening on the screen. So I'm going to enter some information. All of it's dummy information, just so you know, apart from my name. Whenever I'm entering this information, observe this credit card, okay? So we'll just start with name. So as you can imagine, I'm passing this name as content to a text element over here. And I'm changing the styling, so I just have uppercase letters. There's an expression for that, of course. Okay, now I'm going to pass a dummy credit card number. And you can see that this is MasterCard. So how did that happen? Let's see if it recognizes some other patterns. So that's a dummy Visa number, okay? So what is going on here? Of course, we are using expressions to basically check with the regular expressions that I just copied from the web. I didn't write the whole regular expressions for checking the credit card number, but you can find it online. I just copy pasted this expression. I'm checking whether a number is a Visa kind of number or MasterCard kind of number, because credit card numbers are unique, right? They're unique patterns for all the credit card types down there on the market. So you can basically, you can use that inside of a regular expression to validate user input. Now, if I will enter some dummy data into expiration date, I'm getting an error. So you can simulate the whole pattern of validating user input. If we'll enter something that is roughly correct, we are going to get the correct result on this credit card. Now, click onto this security code field, we're actually getting the security card placement over here. Enter it over here. Now the button is activated. And the last thing, we are getting the thank you, Marcin, which I'm using variables to pass the information to the second screen, which is actually in that particular case, that's actually the whole second page. So you might remember that I mentioned that with variables, you can pass things within one page of a prototype, or you can pass it across pages in a prototype, okay? So in that case, I just pass this name to the second page. And most importantly, I actually use the substring expression to cut this string with a full name into first name and last name. So you can do things like that as well. Okay, so that was the last pattern that I wanted to show you. And I think it's a nice way to kind of sum up the webinar. because with this credit card form pattern, it ended with what we started. So we started with passing the value of a variable from one place in a prototype to another. So there you have. We pass my name from the credit card form field to the confirmation page. Then we learn how to use expressions to actually match or validate user input, right? So you definitely see that in this credit card example when we are using the expression to find the true number of a credit card and validate and show it whether that's Visa or MasterCard, right? So you can do that as well. Then we've learned about conditional interactions. And with conditional interactions, as you can imagine, unless something matches this particular format of data, we are getting the error, right? So this is a conditional interactions right here. If it's correct, then we are getting back to the correct state of the interface. So we've learned about variables, we've learned about expressions, we've learned about conditional interactions. And with that, I'm looking forward to hear your questions.
Thanks all for the question. So Marcin, we have a couple of questions here.
Cool.
The first one is, can one write vanilla JS to form expressions?
So not right now. The pure JavaScript integration is something that we are working on with our new technology called Merge. But for expressions, those expressions are kind of like JavaScript method wrapped into UXPin functions. The reason for that is, of course, security. So we are blocking certain things just to prevent attacks into UXPin, just to assure security of your design. So that's why there's not just access to any JavaScript code, because we're executing that on the server. It's all like wrapped in our functions. But if you know JavaScript, then you will recognize a lot of these methods inside of UXPin, a lot of them. They're going to look and work very familiar to just vanilla JS.
Sweet, thanks, Marcin. There's here a question by Adam. How long does it take to create such interactions, like in the credit card example?
You could see that, like when we created this passwords validation in about like 5 minutes. So for credit cards, it would be similar because there's not that much more interactions. The only why this credit card is so impressive, and I can actually show that really quick. It's not that much about the interactions over here as it is about the regular expression over here, right? So that's perhaps the most important thing to understand. So this regular expression is actually matching, that's the MasterCard credit card number. So you could say like, well, writing something like that must be time consuming. But in fact, I didn't write it, I just copied it from the web. And majority of programmers I know, they're actually copy pasting regular expressions from around the web, because who wants to really understand deeply how credit card numbers are formed? Well, maybe some people do. So that's the only more complicated things than you actually saw on today's webinar. So it's not a lot of work, it's just a couple of minutes of work to create something that advanced. And you do it in a visual way too, so you can see results in real time on the screen.
Sweet, thank you. There was a question based on the first example that you gave. Would you be able to save the name box element and reuse it at a later time? This was from the first example where you were inputting your name and clicking submit, and it was bringing it to the other.
Yes, yeah, I understand. Okay, so so information in the variable stays in this variable until the end of the session, you could say, so until you refresh the browser, right? So you can use it at a different time, at a different place inside of the prototype, but it must be within one session. Also, the value of the variable can change when you are overriding it, right? So that's something to keep in mind. So that like variable doesn't have a memory. You could say that variable only knows now. So if you pass a new information to the variable, it's holding this new information. If you refresh the browser, you're restarting the process, which is actually very good for prototyping, because when you're testing with users, you kind of want to start from the scratch, go through the entire user flow, test every single aspect of the prototype and then start over, right? So it's still a simulation of the experience, although it seems so real.
We have a couple more questions here. Can you have a conditional go-to page depending on user input?
Absolutely,
An
yes.
example they gave is if you have 5 checked boxes and you go to a different page depending on the checked input.
Absolutely, yes. So, so I'm not going to set it up, but I can show you where it is. So if you don't have any elements selected on the screen, you automatically get the properties of the canvas. And you can see that within the properties of the canvas, there's still an interaction panel. And over here, you can do either variable change if you want to. If there's a trigger, for example, if there's a button triggering, let's say that this logo is triggering the go to page, you can go to go to page, variable simple demo, and then set up the condition just as we set up on the webinar. So absolutely, you can do conditional page loading. You can trigger interactions on page load. You can trigger interactions on variable change. You can trigger interactions on state change. It's basically whatever you're going to come up with. You can do it. It's pretty neat.
And I know we're a little bit over time here, so we'll take 2 more questions,
Sure.
and the rest we'll be able to answer everyone offline.
Of course.
The first one, there was 2 people asking about the developer handoff, what that would look like specifically in UXPin, and then when you include things such as variables and conditionals.
So we can actually go ahead and just launch the spec mode. So you get the real CSS used to style those elements, right? Because we are dealing with HTML, CSS. So you already see all of that. Now, right now we are not showing the regular expressions over here. It might come up in the future just to show the regular expression over here somewhere, but you basically get the CSS. You can copy it line by line. You can copy everything over here. And then developers can also just access the prototype and see all the states of elements. Let me inspect something for you really quick. Let's see. Okay, so you can see that this button has a state disabled, has a state covered, default. You can basically browse through the states. So which is very cool for developers. They can access the properties of particular states of elements, not just go through all the static artboards and look for the right state of an element, okay? So that's also available. And of course, you can just go through all the interactions and see how the prototype behaves.
Perfect. Thanks, Marcin. I think that's all the time we have now, folks. I know there's a few other here in the QA box that haven't been answered. If you guys can just reach out to hello@uxpin.com and we'll be able to get those answered for you. And I think like Macin announced earlier, this has been recorded and we're gonna go ahead and send this out end of the week, beginning of next week for you all to look over and share for you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.